gentlemen, that is the great Anne Brandt. She was just joining us for a second in Art with Anna. But welcome. We are going to talk today about a man named Gunther Förg. He's a German artist, again. He was born in 1952 in Germany and died in 2013, also in Germany. So he is kind of famous for wanting to break every art rule. So we've talked before about people who wanted to break the rules put in place by the government or society. That wasn't necessarily the case for Gunther, but more he didn't want to be seen as an artist that had to be stuck inside a category. He thought that those categories were kind of rules that were meant to be broken. So he is so interesting because he has made art in like every kind of medium. He's done photography, he's done relief work, he's done sculpture, he's done many, many paintings. So yeah, breaking all the rules, doing whatever kind of he wanted in art. And I think that is really cool. So we're going to look at two art pieces today, like always, and recreate them and learn a little bit about Gunther as we go. So first I'm going to let you guys know what supplies we'll need, and then we'll get started and learn a little bit more about our artist. You will need a piece of white paper, many bright colors of paint, a paintbrush with preferably sort of a flat end to it, a rectangular template, and a cup for water just to clean off your brush. All right, before we jump into our art project, I did want to go back to the basics of art and talk about the 7 elements of visual arts, okay? The first being color. So color is just how the artist uses color. It can be just one color, it can be many colors, even can be the lack of color sometime, but color is an element of art that we use in painting. Now, another element of art is form. Now, form is describing kind of how things are three-dimensionally, so things with more than one shape. You might see this a lot in things like sculpture or things that are more three-dimensional. You can see it in painting sometimes when things are drawn in a way that looks three-dimensional, but typically you'd be thinking about form with things like sculpture. Now, line is pretty self-explanatory, but it's how the artist uses line in the art. Shape is also self-explanatory. This would be more of a flat shape, so shapes that you're painting. Different from form in that form's three-dimensional, shape is more two-dimensional. And also there is the element of space. Now, space seems kind of weird, doesn't it? This could be in painting or in sculpture, but there's 2 types of space. One is positive space. It's just an element, a shape, a line, anything like that. Negative space is when that is disappeared. So you can say there's a square in the positive space of this object and a square in the negative space where there's nothing in this object. It's also something to think about. Texture is also something to think about. Sometimes when you see a painting, you can see the real brush strokes in the painting, or if you have a piece of pottery, you can kind of feel the ridges in the pottery. That would be texture. And lastly is value, and that's how light or dark color is, how much white or how much black is kind of added to color. So we need to think about those elements when looking at this next piece of artwork. All artwork is a combination of some, one, or all of these elements, and many times different art styles. Like if we're thinking about modern art, that's typically clean lines, so line is a big part of it. It's also typically colors that are kind of very basic in the rainbow, like true red and true green, true blue and true yellow, not colors that are mixed. So color is kind of important there too, and it's usually a lot of geometric shapes or forms. So sometimes with modern art, those are kind of the things that you're focusing on. Whereas things like expressionism, if you think of Vincent van Gogh, for example, he has a lot of little brush strokes, right? And they kind of make texture. He also uses complementary colors, so color's a big part of that too. He doesn't really ever have many straight lines though, so line's probably not a part of that. And in minimalism, texture is really not usually a part of that either. So each art movement or type of art kind of has its own elements in it. And the rules are kind of around those things sometimes. So we're going to look at Gunther Förg's artwork today, and we can kind of decide, what do we think out of the 7 elements is in this particular art form? Because again, he kind of did many different styles, he kind of broke the rules of a lot of different styles. So he doesn't really fall into one of those, but that doesn't mean he's not still using just different combinations of the 7 elements of art. One of the artworks we're focusing on today is Gunther's spot paintings. These paintings were just really collections of these colored spots that were made with kind of quick and purposeful brush strokes, I would say. And he made quite a few of them. He was actually did this pretty much exclusively for 3 whole years and was quite obsessed, I would say, with making these pieces of art. Now, looking at art like this, you might think, I can do that, and we're going to do it, and you can do it. But usually the purpose of art, why it's so valued, is because of the context that it's in. So in the 1950s, 40s to 50s, so right when Gunther was born, the most popular art style of that time was something called abstract expressionism. So abstract meaning, not something that looks real or perfect, but expressionism meaning expressing your emotions. So it was this abstract painting that had a lot of emotion behind it. And that was popular in the 1940s and 50s. Now, in the early 1950s, as a response to that, artists were kind of sick of that. They thought that they were having new ideas about art. And out of the early 1950s to the 60s, so when Gunther was kind of a teen or a younger person, there came a movement called minimalism. And that got rid of all emotion. So it was just like blocks of color, and you're like, I could have done that. But it was the first time people were like, I'm going to take all emotion out of art at all. No emotion. The old art was all emotion. Now we have no emotion. And so people thought that was a new and bright idea. And that's why art is valued. It's usually a response to either what's going on in life or a response to what's gone on in art previously. So Gunther kind of had influence from both. He was interested in the abstract kind of elements of abstract expressionism, but also influenced by kind of the clean lines and the more minimal approach, right? Less going on, less emotion added to it. So when we look at these spot paintings, they're abstract and there's a lot of movement. That really leans into kind of the abstract expressionism world, kind of the type of art that was popular when he was born. But he doesn't necessarily talk about emotion in this painting. He actually just wants you to see the brushstroke and the texture, right? The element of texture in art, and see the color as color. So the color in art. So he has these kind of rectangular sections, so there is a little bit of modernity or minimalism to it in the fact that there are kind of set sections of the colors, and they're not really like, it's a little more controlled, so it's not this big emotional thing. So it's a little more minimal that way, but also it is abstract, and you can see the brush strokes. So he's kind of combined the two, which were clashing at the time. So that's why this painting is so unique and valued so much, because this had never been done. He took two kind of competing art forms and kind of merged parts of them to make these paintings. So that's why we're going to make one today. All right, so I have my white sheet of paper and I have my template here. I am starting in the top left corner of my paper with the template because I'm going to kind of move it across like you read. I don't want it to get too much paint on the back from another square. However, if that happens, no problem. This is our art. And remember, Gunther was focused on kind of breaking the rules. So if it gets a little messy, don't be stressed. That's okay. Now, if you want to tape these down with washi tape, that's also an option. You're welcome to try that as well. But I am going to take a color of paint of my choice. I kind of like this light purple color. And I'm just going to square a little bit inside there. And with our paintbrush, we're going to make kind of big strokes that go up and down. And you might need some help getting your hand to go up, down, up, down, up, down. So if you're at Ben's Hope, I think a staff can help you try to get your hand working in that motion. So I will show you. I'm going to take the paint up and down and up and down. And it's good if you can see some of the white through like this. It doesn't have to be fully saturated. That's kind of the texture that Gunther had and was trying to have in his artwork. His artwork, again, it was abstract, but it wasn't about emotion. It was more about the texture, color, and kind of form going on. So we're left with a spot like that. So I'm just going to move this next door, trying to keep in mind not to get wet paint on our stencil. And I'm going to put in another color. And we're just going to repeat this till we've filled up our whole page. All right, so after I had a good base of rectangles, I did start to overlap a little bit because as you can see on Gunther's painting, he also did some overlapping. So I've overlapped colors a little bit. Now that we're toward the end, it's okay if our stencil overlaps a bit because it won't get anything too messy. As you can see, I'm left with a beautiful spot painting. And all I was thinking about was the colors I was using and the texture and movement of my brush strokes. All right, so what do we think? Do we think it looks pretty close to the spot paintings of Gunther Förg? I think so. Nice job. All right, we're gonna move on to something. I would say that this piece was a little more abstract, expressionistic, and we're gonna move on to one of his arts that's a little more minimal. But again, we'll talk about why he's breaking some of those rules. First, let's get out a piece of white paper and also a few different paint colors. I'll explain more. You will need a half sheet of white paper, 2 sheets of construction paper. One is just going to be laid down on your table so you don't get paint on it, and the other one is also going to get thrown away, so don't worry about color. 2 colors of paint, preferably 2 that would be nice if they were mixed together. White and black paint, a paintbrush, a palette or an extra piece of paper, or a plate, but something that you can mix paint on. And a cup for water, again, so you can clean off your brush. And washi tape. All right, for our second project, we are gonna look at Gunther's lead paintings. And yes, I said lead. He did paint with lead with these pieces of art. Now, they do just look like squares of color. Again, many times through this you'll think, I could have done that, or I can do that, and you can, and we are. But we're looking again at the fact that he was inspired by 2 opposing art styles, and he was mixing those styles together, making his own, breaking the rules. So, when we look at these paintings, first, they might remind you of a painting, or many paintings really, by artist Mark Rothko. Now, Mark Rothko was an abstract expressionist. he just did these color field paintings, which are paintings that just have sections of color. And he wanted you, when you stood in front of them, to feel strong emotion. He was trying to evoke really, really strong emotion when you looked at his paintings. In fact, his hope was that when people were at a museum and looking at these large canvases with these colors, that they would actually weep. So very abstract expressionist, very centered on emotion. Something I like about abstract expressionism is they often used unique paint colors. They mixed a lot of paint. They were trying to convey emotion through paint, so they were trying to make colors that represented emotions. Now again, the opposing art style that came after, minimalism, they only used true colors. So they would only use true red. They wouldn't mix it with anything. They'd only use true blue. They wouldn't mix it with anything. But they would also do big sections of color. Instead of trying to evoke emotion, they just wanted you to appreciate the color for what it was. Oftentimes in minimalism too, if they were using a specific material, for instance, if they were doing a sculpture out of wood, they would want you to really just recognize wood for being wood, recognize the thing for what it is and appreciate it for what it is. So here, Gunther has made these art pieces that are a mix of different colors. They're not a pure color. They're colors that have been mixed. And they are color field paintings, right? They're blocks of color, much like Rothko's expressionist paintings. But they're also painted with that gray, and that gray is actually lead. I think someone should have probably told him that lead poisoning was a thing. I don't know if they knew that by then. But he wanted you to recognize the beauty of the lead for what it was. That material, he wanted you to recognize its beauty next to the color. So he's kind of combined these two ideas again. Now you and I are not going to use lead because again, lead poisoning is something serious to be taken seriously. But we are going to use the color gray. And we're also going to be mixing colors like Mark Rothko. And we're just going to pretend we're painting with lead when actually it's just acrylics. So let's get out our supplies and let's make some art together. All right, so I'm starting with one piece of construction paper just so that I can put my half sheet of white paper on top because I'm going to be painting the entire sheet of paper. So instead of getting paint on the tabletop, I'm going to try to just keep it within the borders of the pink piece of paper. Now, because we are color fielding or color blocking, we want to make sure that there's a section of our painting, I'll actually go this way, that doesn't have color on it. We want to keep one spot white so that we can paint it a different color later. So I'm just going to tape down this other piece of paper just so we don't get paint on this side, and we will paint this side a little bit later. All right, so now we're all set up to paint. What we want to do is we wanted to pick two colors that will mix kind of well together. For example, green and orange, if you mix them together, will make brown. That's not necessarily bad. You could definitely use a brown, and I think that that would be right on brand for Gunther. But if you wanted to make a pure color that wasn't brown, I'd pick two colors that mix well together. So red is inside purple, right? Red and blue make purple. So I know red will mix well with purple. So I'm choosing red and purple, but again, you can choose any colors that you'd like and see what color they make when you mix them together. Right, I've got my two colors and I'm right now going to make a unique color. This is kind of like a mauvey rose color. And I'm simply just going to cover this whole side in this color. And this is why I have the pink piece of paper down, because I am getting a little messy. And if you get paint on the table, no problem. We just have to clean it up then. All right, so we have a more interesting mixed color here. and it's in just one half. We can see if we lift this up, the other half of our paper, and it doesn't have to be half. If you wanted to tape it over here, anywhere you really want it, would be fine, as long as there's clear defined sections. So now I'm just gonna fold this over, and now we have this section to paint on. Now, reminder, we're pretending we're painting with lead, and we're focusing on this material that we want people to look at and think about. And lead is a gray color. We obviously don't have lead, so it's not good for you. But we're gonna mix our own gray color. So I am putting some black in here, and I'm gonna add some white. Now we've got a pretty good gray color going. And we are gonna do the same exact thing we did on the other side. We are just covering this side in gray. All right, so now I am simply gonna just remove my sheet of paper, and I'm gonna lift it off here. You can see it a little more clearly. But just like Gunther, we have a faux lead painting. All right, what do you think? Do you think we've successfully completed our task? I think it looks pretty similar to the original. All right, guys, well, that's all for today. Thanks for doing art with Anna with me. Thanks for learning about a new artist, the different techniques he used, and different styles of art, and why paintings that are just blocks of color or scribbles of color can actually be something that was really unique and cool, and why it has value. All right, I will see you guys again next week. Bye.